By the time Vivian rose to power, running her crooked empire on land stolen from me, I already held the mineral rights beneath every single mansion she had built. But let me rewind. Picture this. I'm overseas in Eastern Europe, dodging mortar, and serving my country when a phone call freezes my blood. Some HOA tyrant named Vivian had legally sold off my grandfather's ranch. 1,500 acres of prime American soil that had been ours since 1892, the very same land where my Purple Heart-winning grandfather is buried. While I was bleeding for freedom thousands of miles away, that ranch was sold off for pocket change. When I finally returned home, the first thing I heard was the crunch of gravel under the boots of surveyors carving up my family's cemetery. Vivian thought she had stripped everything from a broken veteran who couldn't fight back. What she didn't know was that my grandfather had left me one final weapon, hidden in those old property records from the 1960s. Legal rights to the ground beneath. 50 luxury mansions worth a combined $47 million. Now tell me, what would you do if you came back from service to find your inheritance stolen? Drop a flag emoji. And where are you tuning in from? Because this could happen anywhere in America. Here's the story of how one veteran turned an HOA land grab into the most expensive property lesson those thieves would ever learn. My name is Staff Sergeant Ezra Thornfield. I'm a third-generation rancher who just spent 18 months keeping the peace in Eastern Europe. While I was out there dodging bullets and missing my own grandfather's funeral, an HOA scavenger circled my family's legacy like a buzzard. That legacy was the Thornfield Ranch, 1,500 acres of rolling pastures, sunlit hills, and the clearest spring-fed lake this side of the Rockies. Grandpa built that land from nothing after World War II, using his GI Bill and Purple Heart pension. He drove every fence post with his own hands, cut every barn beam from our own timber. This was more than just property. It was 3 generations of blood, sweat, and tears. The ranch shared a border with Willowmere Estates, a gated community of 50 lakefront mansions where tech executives and trust fund heirs pay $200,000 to $500,000 just for the privilege of claiming they live next to real America. They've never put in a day of honest work, but they sure never stop whining about the smell of cattle or the sound of roosters at dawn. When I pulled into my driveway after that grueling flight home from Germany, I expected to see my familiar pastures. Instead, the air reeked of spray paint from surveyors marking century-old oak trees like death warrants. Bright orange sold signs pierced my family's soil like daggers. Strangers with clipboards drove stakes straight through my grandfather's rose garden, the scent of crushed petals mixing with diesel fumes from their equipment, not 800 acres gone. Allegedly sold to the Willowmere HOA for $2.3 million. At roughly $2,175 per acre, when the land was worth at least $8,000. Legal theft, plain and simple. My bank account? A measly $247. My remaining 700 acres suddenly shackled by development. Restrictions nobody could explain. And then came the final insult. They had fenced off our family cemetery. The rattle of chain link fencing around my grandfather's fresh grave still echoes in my head. That's when I met Vivian Ashworth. Imagine every nightmare stereotype of an HOA president rolled into one perfectly polished package. She was 52, drove a white Mercedes G-Wagon worth more than most people's yearly salary, and measured grass height with a ruler. In the past year alone, she'd filed 47 HOA violation reports, probably against neighbors who just wanted to live in peace. She greeted me in my own driveway with a smirk that could sour milk. Military housing allowance doesn't cover property taxes. Does it, soldier boy? She sneered without even introducing herself. Then she shoved fraudulent documents at me. Papers, claiming unpaid taxes that my bank records clearly proved didn't exist. "Your grandfather should have planned better," she added, adjusting. "Sunglasses that cost more than my monthly combat pay. This is what happens when military families think they're above civic responsibility." There I stood, in uniform, fresh from 18 months defending her freedom, and she had the nerve to lecture me about patriotism. A hypocrisy burned hotter than tear gas. "Leave this property immediately, or I'll have you arrested for trespassing," she threatened, thumbing her phone like she had law enforcement on speed dial. Here was my nightmare: divorce lawyers. And legal fees had drained me down to $247. The only local attorney, Vivian's golf partner, refused my case for conflict of interest. The county clerk's office lost the original property files. My bank claimed they had no record of the automatic tax payments I'd been making for years. Standing there, watching strangers hammer stakes into my grandfather's grave, I made a silent vow. Vivian had no idea who she was up against. Something in my grandfather's old photographs, his knowing smile told me he'd left me more than just land. Military training teaches patience, strategy, the art of finding your enemy's weak spot. And she was about to learn exactly why you never trample a combat veteran's family legacy. But Vivian didn't stop at stealing land. She wanted to shred my reputation too. Within 48 hours of our first encounter, she filed a bogus restraining order, accusing me of threatening her with military-style violence. A complete lie, rubber-stamped by a judge without even hearing my side. Suddenly, I was banned from half my own county, and that was only her opening move. She put up military-grade security cameras aimed straight at my property, recording my every step like I was a criminal. Then came the posts on the neighborhood app about aggressive veteran behavior and concerning PTSD episodes. She was crafting a narrative, painting me as the dangerous outsider threatening their manicured suburban paradise. Her crowning move? Hosting community safety meetings about undesirable elements in the area. The smell of her designer perfume couldn't hide the stench of her bigotry. She was orchestrating my character assassination with surgical precision. But here's what Vivian underestimated: military intelligence training doesn't vanish when you hang up the uniform. While she was busy with social media games, I was playing chess. And I remembered something my grandfather once told me: when politicians lie, the truth is buried in the paperwork they hope no one ever finds. So I drove 200 miles to the state archives, using my last $47 for gas and parking. Deep in those dusty basement files, I found treasures worth more than her entire jewelry collection. The original 1892 land grant, my grandfather's Purple Heart records, and the smoking gun proof. At my property had never once been delinquent on taxes. Every payment logged and filed, every transaction accounted for and stamped. The taxes Vivian claimed I'd missed were a complete fabrication. The money had been quietly rerouted into the wrong account, thanks to a clerical mistake. Came down to a single misplaced digit. Back during my divorce, my lawyer had warned me about exactly this kind of con. Corrupt insiders shuffle payments, create fake delinquencies, and swoop in to buy property for next to nothing. He'd told Emmy owners still have redemption rights after shady sales, and that federal law grants military service members extra protections. I never imagined I'd end up relying on that advice. Myself, the county assessor who signed off on this emergency sale, happens to live in a $340,000 mansion on 47 Willowmere Drive. Funny coincidence, right? But Vivian's greed set her up for failure. She pushed the sale through 30 days before the legal minimum wait period. She was so sure of her scheme, she didn't even bother making it look legitimate. In her hurry to grab my inheritance, she left a paper trail that screamed fraud louder than a smoke alarm at 3 a.m. With evidence like that, I thought justice was inevitable. Instead, Vivian struck back like a rattlesnake with its back to the wall. She hired a private investigator to dig through my divorce files, my military record, anything she could use to smear me. The local paper ran stories painting me as a bitter veteran unable to live under civilian authority. Small world, the editor's wife lives at 23 Willor Drive. Then the harassment began. Noise complaints every time I cranked my tractor before. 8 a.m. deputies citing me for disturbing the peace when I worked cattle on my own land. Tickets for unauthorized construction when I repaired my own fences. It was like living under a dictator, except this one wore designer yoga pants and drove a Mercedes. Vivian's crowning act was vicious genius. One night at 3 a.m., I found surveyor stakes rammed through my grandfather's beloved rose garden, destroying plants that had stood for 60 years. The security cameras caught the HOA groundskeeper doing it, acting under orders that could have only come from her. When I confronted Vivian, her response was ice cold. Those roses were encroaching on community property. Standards must be upheld. Standing among crushed petals, the air thick with the mix of diesel fumes and ruined blossoms, it hit me. This wasn't just about money. It was about power. Vivian thrived on crushing anyone who couldn't fight back. Only problem? She'd picked the wrong veteran this time. Her response to my evidence was like watching a gambler shove all their chips in with a pair of twos. She hired the priciest law firm in the state capital, the kind of place where rates start at $800 an hour, and the marble lobby alone makes you feel like you don't belong. Within a week, I was slapped with a lawsuit, $500,000 in damages plus legal fees, accusing me of aggressive trespassing and property destruction. Her big move? Claiming I'd driven my cattle across HOA land, which, in reality, was the very property she'd stolen. The lawsuit even described my grandfather's prized Angus bulls as dangerous livestock deliberately weaponized against innocent homeowners. I had to reread that line 3 times before the laughter finally stopped. In Vivian's warped little universe, cows were assault weapons, but 2 can play at the high-priced lawyer game. I reached out to the Military Legal Aid Society and got connected with a grizzled old JAG officer who'd seen every scam in the book. His voice crackled through the phone like dry leaves. "Son, this smells fishier than a week-old salmon. Let me make a few calls." Those calls led me to Sarah Chun, a property rights attorney from the neighboring state who specialized in HOA abuse. She took veteran cases pro bono. Her own father had lost his farm to the same brand of corruption. In our first meeting, Sarah slid a fat folder across the table and hit me with the best news I'd heard in months. Most HOAs are technically illegal thanks to paperwork lapses, and yours may be no exception. So we dug into Willow's corporate filings. What we uncovered was a gift. The HOA had never properly registered with the state. For 3 years, they'd been running as a fake governing body collecting dues without authority, making rules they had no legal right to enforce. It was like realizing the schoolyard bully was actually a 90-pound weakling stuffed into a fake muscle suit. I remembered from deployment how often organizations failed to renew registrations, leaving them powerless on paper. Sarah explained that homeowners can challenge such HOAs in court, sometimes even clawing back years of illegally collected fees. And then came the real bombshell. While combing through their finances, we discovered Vivian had personally profited from the sale of my land. Her landscaping company, Ashworth Aesthetics, had landed a $180,000 beautification contract with the HOA the very same month they seized my property. She'd literally sold my inheritance, then paid herself with the proceeds. It was like watching someone rob a bank and then invoice the bank for consulting. Sarah filed a motion asking the court to throw out every action taken by the HOA, arguing the group wasn't even legally incorporated. The courtroom was overflowing when Vivian's $800 an hour lawyer had to stand up and justify why his client was essentially running a criminal enterprise under the disguise of a neighborhood association. Watching him squirm was more entertaining than primetime TV, but Vivian wasn't about to fold. She scrambled to convene an emergency HOA meeting, determined to backdate approval for everything they had done and rush through the incorporation process. Out of 50 homeowners, only 12 bothered to show. Most were out of town or simply exhausted with her games. At nearly midnight, with only her inner circle present, she rammed through votes that should have required participation from the entire community. The air reeked more of desperation than of the stale coffee they'd been serving since early evening. Her voice carried the edge of someone fully aware their empire was collapsing, but still unwilling to admit defeat. 2 days later, a process server showed up at my doorstep with another lawsuit, this time demanding $1.2 million in punitive damages. Vivian claimed my legal challenges amounted to harassment and threatened to seize the 700 acres I still owned to satisfy the judgment. Bold didn't even begin to describe her. She had guts like a rookie skydiver, but her case was weaker than soggy tissue. Standing on my porch with those papers in hand, my grandfather's wind chimes playing softly in the background, I recognized she had just made a catastrophic error. In her panic to shut me down, she'd escalated to a point that would inevitably attract serious scrutiny. The chimes reminded me of something Grandpa used to say, "When your enemy is messing up, don't stop them." I was ready to let Vivian dig her own grave as deep as she liked. Her paranoia only grew worse. Since she couldn't crush me in court, she turned her fury on the entire Willowire Estates community, ruling like a dictator purging dissent. Leave Christmas lights up past January 2nd? That's a $200 fine. Plant tomatoes in your own backyard? A $500 penalty for unauthorized agriculture. She was punishing people for the crime of living normally. Her cruelest move came when she threatened foreclosure on elderly Margaret Clearwater's home over a mere $45 in overdue fees. Margaret, a retired third-grade teacher who had just lost her husband to cancer, was still grieving and struggling to keep up with HOA demands. Vivian's cold response: "Grief doesn't excuse financial irresponsibility." That was the breaking point. A community can only be pushed so far before it pushes back. Margaret quietly created a private Facebook group called Willowire Truthdillers, which grew from 5 members to 43 in just 2 weeks. The stories shared there could have filled a horror novel. Navy veteran Tom Bridgewater, whose perfectly manicured lawn had somehow earned him 3 citations for being too uniform, became an unlikely ally. One day, while we both shopped for security cameras at the hardware store, he pulled me aside and muttered, "That woman's crazier than a soup sandwich, son. What can we do to stop her?" So I began organizing Know Your Rights workshops at the library, sharing everything Sarah and I had uncovered about HOA law. 8 neighbors showed up the first night. The next time, 22. By the 3rd session, it was standing room only, with residents scribbling notes like their futures depended on it, which, under Vivian's tightening grip, they did. Then Margaret dropped a revelation that shifted the entire fight. While cleaning out her late husband's files, she discovered the original HOA covenants from 1965 tucked away in their attic. He had served on the founding development committee and had kept everything. The fragile yellowed papers held language. That made my heart race. The bylaw specifically banned the HOA from acquiring land beyond the original 50 lots. Vivian's purchase of my property wasn't just against state law, it broke the HOA's own founding rules. Lawyers called that ultra vires action so far beyond legal authority, they're void from the start, like a small-town mayor trying to declare war on Canada. Sarah explained it best. When an organization oversteps its legal boundaries, it's as though those actions never happened. Vivian had been playing chess with illegal moves the entire time, but Margaret wasn't finished. Tom's digging into the community pool's maintenance fund uncovered $89,000 missing over 3 years. The money had been funneled straight into Ashworth Aesthetics, Vivian's landscaping company for services either grossly overpriced or never performed at all. Residents had been paying inflated fees, while she siphoned funds to prop up her private business empire. The pool itself was living proof. Murky green algae thick enough to walk on, broken filters, and diving boards patched together with duct, tape, and blind faith. The acrid stench of stagnant water carried for 50 feet. Yet somehow, just last year, her company billed $30,000 for premium maintenance. When confronted at the next HOA meeting, Vivian doubled down. She brought in hired security, scheduled the vote at times when most neighbors were stuck at work, and threatened lawsuits against anyone spreading lies about the finances. But the meeting felt less like leadership and more like watching a dictatorship collapse live in front of its citizens. Vivian stood rigidly at the podium, her voice climbing sharper with every question as furious homeowners demanded answers she didn't have. The security guards shifted uneasily. Aware they weren't protecting order anymore, they were shielding. A tyrant from her own neighbors. This is what happens when outsiders infiltrate a peaceful community. She barked, her finger stabbing in my direction. Some people just can't handle that property changed hands legally. That's when Margaret rose, her teacher's tone cutting through the uproar, as cleanly as silk sliced by steel. Vivian, I've lived here longer than you've been alive. This isn't about agitators. This is about a board member robbing her own neighbors. The cheer that followed rattled the windows of the community center. Watching, Vivian's expression collapse as her own neighborhood turned on her was sweeter than my grandmother's apple pie. Her petty empire of control was finally splintering, and the sound of it was beautiful. At 6:47 a.m. that Tuesday, Sarah called. Her voice trembled with excitement. Ezra, you need to sit down. I've found something that makes Vivian's nightmare look like a pleasant dream. She'd been combing through the original development records from the 1960s when she stumbled on a loophole that could make corporate attorneys break down in tears. Back when Willower Estates was first created, the original landowner, my grandfather's neighbor, had sold only the surface rights to the developers. He had kept everything below: mineral rights, subsurface access, even foundation support rights. In 1963, my grandfather quietly purchased those underground rights for $500, assuming the minerals might one day be valuable. What he had truly acquired was the legal foundation beneath every single mansion in Willower Estates. All 50 homes sat atop property that, on paper, now belonged to me. Sarah explained it this way. Imagine you own a house, but someone else owns the very ground your basement rests on. That's what had happened here. I'd learned years earlier, during a geology course the Army sent me to in Colorado, that surface rights and mineral rights are separate legal entities. Cases existed where people discovered their houses didn't actually sit on land they legally controlled. The realization slammed into me like a freight train made of justice. By law, I could demand the removal of every structure built on my underground property. The estimated cost of relocating 50 luxury homes, between $12 and $15 million. The alternative? The homeowners could buy the subsurface rights from me at fair market value, valued at $45 million for the entire development. When Sarah broke the news to Vivian's attorneys, their $800 an hour lawyer scheduled an emergency session that drained $25,000 in a single afternoon. Their conclusion? Devastating. My position was untouchable. No insurance policy on earth would cover a property dispute of this size. The bedrock of their entire community, both literally and figuratively. belonged to the veteran they had tried to destroy. Through binoculars, I watched Vivian's empire implode. Moving trucks crowded the driveways of Willower. Real estate agents descended like vultures on a carcass. Property values nosedived overnight as the mortgage industry whispered that title insurance might not protect these homes. The sound of Vivian's costly fountain pen slamming against the marble table during that fateful meeting, captured by the security cameras she'd installed herself, became the signature sound of her downfall. Her $1.2 million mansion was suddenly worth only what I demanded for the land underneath it. That evening, Margaret called, laughing so hard she could barely get the words out. "Ezra, honey, Vivian's been driving around in circles for 3 hours like a stray dog. I think she's breaking down." Tom's reaction was sharper. She thought she was playing chess with a country boy. "Turns out you were playing 3D chess while she was stuck on checkers." The nuclear option sat squarely in my hands. I could order the evacuation of every home in Willower, ruining 50 families just to satisfy vengeance. Or I could negotiate a settlement, reclaiming my stolen land along with compensation that would make Vivian's theft the costliest mistake in county history. But Vivian didn't understand military training. We're taught to complete the mission with minimal collateral damage. The target was her, not the innocent homeowners duped by her lies. The leverage was now absolute. Vivian faced only 2 paths: financial destruction or criminal prosecution. Her stolen kingdom stood on ground she never owned in the first place, and the very foundation of her power was mine to command. Justice wasn't on the way. It was already standing on my property, wearing combat boots and carrying legal documents sharp enough to make her regret ever crossing a thornfield. When you hold nuclear firepower, you don't just press the button. You craft a strategy that maximizes impact while containing fallout. Sarah assembled a legal strike force that could have impressed Pentagon war planners. A property rights attorney who had never lost a veteran's case. A forensic accountant who could follow dirty money through more layers than a wedding cake. And a real estate expert whose valuations had stood up in the Supreme Court. Our war room was my grandfather's study, covered wall to wall with maps and documents, the air thick with coffee, leather, and the electricity of an impending victory. We outlined a 3-phase campaign: exposure, negotiation, and, if necessary, full enforcement. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, our forensic accountant, had traced every stolen cent with surgical accuracy. Vivian skimmed $340,000 over 4 years. She reported, spreading charts across the oak table. Pool maintenance, landscaping, security services, all invoices for work never actually done. She's been running a one-woman crime syndicate masquerading as community management. The evidence was overwhelming. Original mineral rights documents from 1963, forged tax papers with mismatched ink and dates, HOA records showing years of self-dealing that would shame mob accountants, and time-stamped videos of illegal property. Alterations. But our greatest weapon was Margaret, an unlikely master spy. Her Wednesday bridge group included Vivian's closest allies, and as it turns out, elderly ladies share secrets faster than CIA agents. After 3 glasses of wine got through Margaret's quiet intel, we uncovered Vivian's Swiss bank account with exactly $2.3 million, the same amount she had paid for my stolen property. Tom orchestrated something incredible: a veterans convoy from 4 counties, all ready to witness justice firsthand. These weren't hobbyists or weekend soldiers. They were combat veterans, Purple Heart recipients, men and women who had bled for the Constitution Vivian trampled. The rumble of their motorcycles and trucks would send a clear message: this country still defends those who defended it. Our media strategy was exact and deliberate. In the Army, I'd studied psychological warfare, and I knew one thing well: the battlefield of public opinion follows the same rules as combat. We assembled press packets that drew a sharp contrast between my grandfather's decorated Bronze Star service and Vivian's theft of veteran-owned property. Social media campaigns spotlighted our family cemetery, stranded behind enemy lines. Anonymous leaks were fed to investigative reporters about corruption in the local government. Sarah had mapped out multiple settlement scenarios ranging from absolute victory to acceptable compromise. We'll give them 3 choices, she explained, her tone steady with the assurance of someone holding a royal flush. Return everything. They stole plus damages, purchase subsurface rights at fair market value, or face full evacuation and criminal prosecution. Our ace in the hole was the insurance revelation, a psychological strike crafted to break them. Homeowner policies specifically excluded property rights battles. Title insurers had already refused to defend homeowners in the untenable position of living in houses built on someone else's land. If forced to move, most would lose it all. During our last planning session, we uncovered something that made the coming win even sweeter. Environmental engineers' soil tests showed the HOA's construction projects had polluted the lake with runoff from poorly installed drainage systems. Vivian's development was in violation of EPA standards, giving U.S. federal jurisdiction and stacking potential criminal charges that could extend her prison time. Margaret's infiltration of Vivian's inner circle delivered our final piece of intel. Vivian intended to flee to Switzerland if the case turned against her. She was preparing to liquidate assets, transfer funds offshore, and vanish before charges could stick. What she underestimated was how quickly federal agents move when stolen military property is involved. The community uprising was reaching critical momentum. Margaret's homeowner revolt had secured signatures from 38 out of 50 residents, demanding Vivian's immediate removal. Tom's recall petition surpassed the required threshold by 15 signatures. Local reporters were digging in after receiving our anonymous financial documents, and the state attorney general had already launched a fraud probe. That last night, I sat in Grandpa's chair, surrounded by stacks of legal files that would restore our family's honor. I could almost feel him there with me. The dog tags on. His portrait caught the lamplight, reminding me that justice delayed isn't always denied. Sometimes it arrives perfected. Tomorrow, Vivian would discover why you never rob a veteran's family. The war machine was assembled, locked, and aimed squarely at her corrupt empire. All that remained was pulling the trigger. But desperation makes people reckless, and Vivian was drowning in it. When the legal battlefield failed her, she turned to sabotage with the grace of a wrecking ball. My family's water well flowing clear for 3 generations, suddenly cracked, draining dry overnight. Repair estimate, $12,000. The contractor responsible? A man tied by county records to regular jobs for Ashworth Aesthetics. But that was only Vivian's opening move. Soon, anonymous complaints flooded the county's environmental office, accusing my cattle ranch of tainting the lake with military chemicals. The irony was suffocating. The same woman whose illegal construction had truly poisoned the watershed now accused me of environmental crimes. Inspectors showed up with clipboards and suspicion only to find soil so clean it might as well have been a surgical ward. Her psychological offensive escalated into outright character assassination. Rumors spread like wildfire stories of my violent PTSD episodes and unprovoked outbursts at neighbors. Suddenly, the local diner owner whose mortgage was conveniently tied to Vivian's bank refused to serve me. The hardware store clerk eyed me like I might snap any second. It felt like living in a town where everyone thought I was a live grenade. Then came the bribery attempt, the moment that proved Vivian had lost her grip on reality. She cornered me in the courthouse parking lot, her Mercedes idling like a getaway car, and offered $500,000 in cash if I'd leave town. The way she phrased it made my skin crawl like I was damaged goods that needed to be hidden from polite society. Think about it. Soldier, she said, her voice syrupy with false concern. Veterans with trauma need quiet places. Suburban. Life may be too much for you. She suggested I'd be better off in some isolated cabin where my so-called episodes wouldn't scare normal people. What she didn't know was that I had recorded every single interaction since day one. That entire exchange bribe, veiled threats, and all was captured in crystal clear audio, enough to make a prosecutor salivate. But Vivian saved her darkest. Move for last. Real vandals, professionals, not kids with spray paint, came at night and surgically cut my perimeter fence while I was at the VA for a checkup. The gaps they left were wide enough for my cattle to wander onto the county highway. At 3:47 a.m., I got the call every rancher dreads. One of my grandfather's prized Angus had been struck dead by a semi. The financial loss stung, but the emotional blow was worse. That cow traced its lineage back to the herd my grandfather built after the war. Vivian's response was as vile as it was fast. Before the body was even cold, she'd phoned the sheriff, claiming my ranch was a public hazard. Local TV crews swarmed in, filming the carcass while she gave interviews about reckless veterans endangering families. The morning headline nearly split me in two. Troubled veterans' negligence causes highway accident. Not a word about sabotage. Not a hint of who cut those wires. Just another tale of a broken soldier who couldn't handle civilian life. Meanwhile, Margaret's Bridge Club uncovered Vivian's so-called nuclear option. She was filing for emergency bankruptcy to protect her wealth while shuffling her mansion into a Kaiming Island shell company. The thief who'd spent 4 years bleeding. Her neighbor's dry was suddenly crying poverty over my frivolous lawsuits. The smell of hydraulic fluid from sabotaged farm equipment mixed with the stench of Vivian's desperation as she played her last cards. Security cameras caught masked figures vandalizing machinery, cutting my tractor's brake lines, even poisoning. My grandfather's memorial oak with industrial herbicide. But every one of those attacks only tightened the noose. Sarah meticulously documented everything, constructing a conspiracy case destined to put Vivian in federal prison. The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit had already frozen her Swiss accounts, thanks to our evidence, standing beside Grandpa's oak. Tree as its century-old leaves turned brown, I understood her fatal error. She had escalated from property theft to attempted murder. Those severed brake lines could have killed me. Vivian had crossed the line from white-collar criminal to someone fit for maximum security. That night, another crash of glass shattered the dark as my security lights were smashed. But this time, I was ready. Justice was on the march, and it wore combat boots. Vivian's panic tipped into psychosis once she realized bankruptcy wouldn't shield her. Federal agents had frozen her offshore accounts before she could even whisper. Cayman Islands, and her clumsy asset shuffling looked childish compared to true financial criminals. So she played the only card left, total character destruction through staged evidence. The scheme was as simple as it was diabolical. She hired a look-alike and actor close, enough to me in build and face to fool security cameras, and sent him to Murphy's Tavern on a packed Friday night. This fake Ezra picked fights, threatened people, and shouted about killing HOA board members before storming out. Hours later, edited footage was plastered all over social media, painting me as a dangerous veteran making terroristic threats. Her piece de resistance came when she planted evidence in my truck. During a random traffic stop, the sheriff's deputy, whose daughter's tuition was quietly covered by an anonymous Ashworth Aesthetics Scholarship, discovered an open bottle of bourbon beneath my passenger seat. Suddenly, I was slapped with DUI charges. Despite being sober and having multiple witnesses for my whereabouts. Then came the restraining order, a work of pure fiction worthy of a Stephen King novel. In sworn testimony, Vivian claimed I had threatened her with military-style violence, and outlined advanced tactical knowledge that posed an imminent threat to community safety. She insisted I had described in detail how a veteran could neutralize multiple targets before police could respond. Every word was fabricated, but it worked. The judge expanded the order to cover the entire Willow development, effectively banishing me from half my own county. Even driving past the community entrance risked my arrest. That's when our counterintelligence team uncovered Vivian's true endgame. Margaret's bridge club had outperformed the CIA. Apparently, wine and gossip were the perfect tools for extracting secrets from careless conspirators. Vivian was planning to dissolve the HOA completely, drain the remaining funds, and flee to Switzerland before charges could land. Her plan was fast: transfer the community's money into her accounts, claim the HOA voted to disband under legal harassment, and board a one-way flight to Zurich within 72 hours. She'd already bought the ticket on the Community Pool Maintenance Fund's credit card. But while Vivian was busy plotting her daring escape, we were quietly tightening the net around her dot. Sarah had been working hand in hand with federal prosecutors, orchestrating the timing down to the minute. The FBI's financial crimes probe was set to peak with arrest warrants issued exactly 1 hour before Vivian planned to disappear. Her Swiss accounts were locked, her assets seized by court order, and her passport flagged across international databases. Meanwhile, our media strategy was hitting its peak. Carefully placed anonymous tips had fueled a statewide newspaper expose on HOA corruption and stolen veteran property. The optics were flawless. A war hero's family cemetery, desecrated by a greedy suburban tyrant. Public opinion had turned so harshly against Vivian that walking through town invited nothing but hostile stares. Tom's veteran convoy had grown into something we'd never dared imagine. Word traveled fast through military networks in 4 states of fellow soldiers. Family legacy was under assault. Combat vets, Purple Heart recipients, Gold Star families, all were arriving to stand as witnesses. When justice was finally delivered, their motorcycles with thunder like a reminder that America still guards those who've sacrificed for her. By then, the rebellion had hit full force. That's when Vivian made her desperate move. She offered to sell back 400 acres of my stolen land for $1.20. Million the same price she paid for all 800. Her so-called compromise required me to drop every lawsuit and criminal charge, letting her keep half my inheritance. It was a hollow bluff, both pitiful and insulting. Take the deal, she warned, or I'll torch the community center before I let you ruin everything I built. The woman who'd spent years bullying her neighbors was now threatening arson. To dodge justice. But Margaret provided the intel that sealed Vivian's downfall. At their last bridge game, after 3 glasses of wine, Vivian had let her guard down. She admitted to forging the tax records herself, bragging about how easy it was to trick dumb government clerks and fabricate delinquencies. Margaret had recorded the confession on her phone, every damning word, crystal-clear. The trap was set for the following night's community meeting. Vivian believed she held the upper hand, preparing to deliver her grand ultimatum before slipping away. Forever. What she didn't know was that federal agents were already in position, her exits monitored, and her own confession queued up to play before 200 witnesses. That evening, the sound of motorcycle engines echoed as the convoy rolled in early, circling the community center like troops fortifying a forward base. Tomorrow, Vivian would learn the hard way. When you rob a veteran's family, justice doesn't knock politely. It breaks the door down by 6 p.m. The parking lot resembled a military staging ground. 30 motorcycles and pickup trucks lined in formation. American flags gleaming like battle standards in the sunset. Veterans in leather jackets stood rigid, an honor guard that could have graced Arlington itself. These weren't hobbyists. They were men and women who had bled for the Constitution Vivian had trampled. Inside, the atmosphere was so thick with tension, it felt like a blade could slice it. 200 townspeople filled every seat, while reporters set up cameras as if for a presidential debate. Sheriff Mitchell had deputies stationed at each exit officially for crowd control, but in truth to make sure someone didn't bolt. Then she arrived. Vivian swept in fashionably late, stepping out of her white Mercedes beside her $800 an hour lawyer, whose briefcase probably cost more than a working family's monthly rent. She strutted through the packed hall like royalty, addressing peasants' flawless makeup, designer suit, radiating arrogance. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice polished with that political cadence that pretends sincerity, but grates like nails on a chalkboard. "I've called this meeting to resolve a misunderstanding with Mr. Thornfield. Despite his military service, which we all respect, certain legal complexities demand adult supervision." The condescension was suffocating. Here stood a woman who had embezzled community funds, robbed her neighbors, and committed federal crimes lecturing a combat veteran about adult supervision. "I'm prepared to offer a generous settlement," she continued, reading from her script. "Mr. Thornfield may repurchase 400 acres of the disputed property for $1.2 million, a discount that reflects our community's respect for veterans. In return, all legal action ends, and we move forward together." That's when I rose. Silence swept the room except for the rustle of leather jackets as 30 veterans straightened. "Vivian," I said, my voice steady with the authority of someone who's faced real enemies on real battlefields, "I appreciate the offer. But before we talk money, let's talk ownership." I nodded to Sarah. With perfect timing, she lit up the projector. The 1963 mineral rights deed appeared on the screen, my grandfather's signature and the county seal glowing in high resolution. "These documents prove I own the subsurface rights beneath every home in Willower Estates," I declared. "Every foundation, basement, and septic system sits on land that legally belongs to me." The room gasped like air sucked from a chamber. Realtor Patricia Wells, whose house was on that very land, whispered, "Oh my God," loud enough for the back row. "The current market price for those mineral rights is $47 million. I continued, watching Vivian's complexion drain faster than her finances. "Alternatively, relocating all 50 homes would cost about $15 million. Her lawyer snapped his briefcase, shut with a sound that echoed like a gunshot, already calculating how quickly he could escape this disaster. But I wasn't finished. "And since we're discussing ownership, let's also address theft." Margaret rose, trembling but resolute, holding up her phone like evidence in a courtroom. "I have a recording of Vivian admitting she forged tax documents and stole veteran property. Would you like to hear it?" The playback was flawless, Vivian's wine-slurred voice mocking stupid clerks and bragging about fake tax bills. Each word hammered the coffin shut. That's when FBI Agent Rodriguez stepped forward, badge gleaming under fluorescent light. "Vivian Ashworth, you're under arrest for wire fraud, conspiracy, embezzlement, and violations of the Service Members Civil Relief Act." The hall erupted like a stadium after a game-winning touchdown. Cameras flashed. Vivian's mask finally cracked. She shrieked about communists and ungrateful neighbors while Rodriguez calmly read her rights. "This is persecution," she howled, thrashing against the cuffs. "I built this community. I protected property values. They should be thanking me." Then Sheriff Mitchell produced his own warrant. "Ma'am," he said firmly, "you're also under arrest for conspiracy, money laundering, and about 15 other charges will go over downtown." The snap of the cuffs locking shut was sweeter than Sunday morning church bells dot as Vivian was escorted out in irons, her luxury heels striking against the linoleum. The veteran raised his hand in silent salute, not to her, But to justice finally? Delivered from the back, Tom's voice carried, "That's how America deals with its enemies, folks." Applause erupted, lasting 3 unbroken minutes. Outside, the roar of veterans' motorcycle engine ignited, their thunder rolling across Willower like freedom's own anthem. Justice came fast and without mercy. Vivian was handed 5 years in federal prison and ordered to pay $2.1 million in restitution. Every dollar stolen tracked down, restored with interest. The county assessor who'd engineered the fraud was stripped of his pension, served 2 years, and was forever barred from public service. Seeing parasites finally face real punishment was better than Christmas morning after deployment. Within 6 months, my family's 1,500 acres were back under our rightful name. The newly elected HOA board, with Margaret as president and Tom as treasurer, operated with a radical honesty, monthly financial reports, open ledgers, and a constitutional amendment requiring unanimous approval for any expense over $500. No dictators, no backroom deals, just neighbors supporting one another in peace. The surface rights agreement became a blueprint for fair negotiation. Rather than ruin 50 families out of vengeance, I sold the mineral rights at 20% below market, $8.2 million. Spread across 10 years, interest-free. A veteran's discount for those misled by crooks. At last, the HOA existed to serve the community, not enrich its rulers. Personal healing followed in ways I hadn't expected. Built a ranch house on the hill overlooking the family cemetery, where my grandfather's headstone greeted morning and evening. I replanted the rose garden with heirloom blooms whose fragrance carried me back to childhood. Visits. Those roses had outlasted one war. They would certainly outlast a corrupt HOA president. The changes in our town stunned everyone. Margaret's steady leadership brought compassion and competence. To HOA management. Tom organized monthly veteran groups, helping former soldiers avoid property traps before they became legal disasters. Our library workshops expanded statewide, teaching citizens how to defend themselves from municipal corruption and HOA abuse. Local editor Patricia Kane earned a state journalism award for her investigative series, proving small-town reporting can still shake the system when truth takes priority over access. Her coverage sparked legislative reforms, mandatory HOA financial audits, and background checks for all candidates seeking board seats. But the crowning achievement was Thornfield Veterans Scholarship Fund, seeded with $500,000 from the settlement. It supports children of deployed service members throughout college, ensuring families never have to choose between military duty and their children's future. In 5 years, 47 students have been funded, 3 now serving in the armed forces, 2 practicing as veterans' rights attorneys. Every year, our fundraising gala brings the town together at the restored ranch, where veterans and neighbors share barbecue and stories beneath the same stars. My grandfather once gazed upon. Margaret organizes silent auctions of local art, while Tom leads tours of our memorial garden dedicated to county veterans. Even residents who once resented Menno contribute generously to honor their neighbors in uniform. The legal precedent from my cassis, now required reading in law schools nationwide. Sarah Chun travels the country teaching property rights at veterans organizations. The Thornfield Doctrine now shields military familiars from predatory governments and corrupt HOAs, ensuring no soldier returns home to find their inheritance stolen. Personal joy found me when I least expected it. I married Janet Morrison. The librarian wand uncovered critical property documents in the early days of our battle. Together, we adopted 2 children, orphans of a Marine lost in Afghanistan, giving them the stable home and proud legacy every military child deserves. Our ranch now works both as a cattle operation and a retreat where veterans can heal among those who understand their sacrifices. The call came last Tuesday. a Marine sergeant in California, his family farm under threat from eminent domain abuse, told me, "Sir, I heard about what you did in Willower. Can you help me fight these bastards?" Looking up at my wall of thank you letters from Purple Heart recipients, Gold Star families, and veterans who reclaimed their land through our legal strategy, I felt my grandfather's proud smile settle over the room. "Son," I said, "gather your documents and prepare for war. Justice isn't finished yet." Through my window drifted the laughter of children playing in the restored rose garden, mingling with the soft song of Grandpa's wind chimes. Some battles end in surrender, others end in victories. So completeth the enemy. S defeat, Beko Mesaverian's liberation. This is what happens when David doesn't just topple Goliath, he teaches every other. David Ho to sling a stone. Drop a comment with your worst HOA nightmare. Let's drag these petty tyrants into the light together. Hit subscribe for more true stories of underdogs who fought back and won. Thanks for joining us on HOA Stories, where neighbors stand up to HOA Karens. And karma always comes knocking. If you enjoyed this story, tap that like button. Share your thoughts below. Can subscribe for weekly tales of real-life neighborhood battles and victories.